you so much for having me here. So I'll give you a little bit of a preview of what we expect from a consumer standpoint, and also what merchants even are finding to be the most successful and valuable ways that they can promote and reach shoppers during this very difficult and challenging year. So I want to start with just a handful of takeaways that I think are important for you to keep in mind as you think about how do you maximize what is upcoming. The first is really about the purchase journey, having so many different touch points, and to really reach shoppers, to have just a single channel strategy like a Google strategy or a Facebook strategy are probably not going to be sufficient. So to have that diversification is crucial. And I'll talk you through, even for different types of products, what are the touch points that shoppers use, of which, of course, things like affiliates and content sites are often incredibly effective. We also will spend some time talking about promotions and coupons, particularly for acquiring new shoppers, but even for really engaging some of your best shoppers, even those can be incredibly effective. And the last bit is really about thinking about first-time promotions and really incorporating that into your product mix and into that portfolio. And for those of you, hopefully all of this is legible. I know that the font is a little bit small, but if you will get copies and access to all of these slides after. So certainly, you don't feel like you need to take screenshots because you'll get access to this. Number one is Forrester's 2021 e-commerce projections. So one of the big questions about the pandemic is how much was e-commerce a beneficiary of the pandemic? And without a doubt, it was an enormous beneficiary, because when we look at what our old projected numbers were, which were in the light green, and then you look at the dark green numbers, there's that lift, which not only is large, but it's sustained, because these are data points that go from 2020 to 2024. And in 2021, what we expect is that about a quarter of all retail sales will happen through the e-commerce channel. So that's a big deal. And that's going to vary from category to category. You have some subsectors, like, for instance, apparel and footwear, where it's even higher. We expect that number may be 40% in some cases. And in other categories like grocery, it still tends to be mostly offline, and that's in the relatively low single digits. So there's a huge variance among those different categories, but net on average, it's about 24%. The second point I think is important for everyone to think about is that shoppers are still cautious, but the good news is that they are less wary than before. So what we've been doing is collecting a lot of consumer data points on consumer confidence in physical retail environments, like whether they're wearing masks or whether they're comfortable going into stores. And we have a few data points. The first two on this slide here are from August and November last year, and then we took another data point, just a pulse check in just this past July. And what you'll see is that those July numbers, which are in the dark green, have come down from the worst of the fears of last year. So things like people feeling obligated to wear masks in stores or socially distancing quite as much are certainly, they position the shopping consumer well to feel more comfortable actually buying and consuming. So that is something that I think is good news going into Q4. Number three is really a point about the holiday sales in particular. And when Forrester looks at holiday sales, we're looking at the months of November and December primarily. So those are the numbers that you see here, November and December consolidated figures. And the good news is that we're projecting in 2021 an up year again. So all of those gains that the e-commerce industry saw in 2020, the industry will hold on to them in 2021 and will continue to grow. Now, will it grow as much as it did in 2020? Absolutely not, because the 2020 growth rates were pretty strong double digits. It was like 24% year over year. So what we project in 2021 is that it'll be a haircut down from that. It'll probably be in the teens, probably the mid-teens somewhere. So lower, but the good news is that it's still going to be higher than it was last year. We're not going to give those gains back. And Forrester will also be releasing our formal holiday e-commerce forecast in the next few weeks as well. Number 4 is consumer confidence. And this is part of the reason that we expect those numbers to continue to rise, is that when we are looking at this time last year, this time earlier in the pandemic, the consumer confidence levels were pretty low. And I use usually a couple of different resources to understand consumer confidence. One is the U.S. Household Pulse Survey, the Census Bureau's Household Pulse Survey, and the other resource is the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey, and both essentially have consumer confidence at a pretty strong level. And you also have to keep in mind that what happened even before the pandemic was off the charts optimistic. And it's important to recognize that while some people certainly may not have all of the same great economic advantages as those who did well through the pandemic, either because they were able to preserve their jobs or they had a significant amount of savings put aside during the pandemic, it is still, relatively speaking, strong for the majority of shoppers. And that's reflected in number 5 here, which is that we expect net sales for the holidays to be up. So we conducted a series of surveys with consumers relatively recently in the last few weeks, asking them whether they were going to buy more in the way of holiday gifts. And if you look at the green minus the red, that is where the net delta of more spending is coming from. So you have 25% minus 18. There you go. That's a positive number. Number 6 is that most consumers will be holiday shoppers. So the addressable market of who you need to go after is essentially everyone. So that first bar is really the percent of people who say that they're not going to do any holiday shopping at all. As you can see, that number is 5%. So if you take the converse of that, that means that essentially everybody else, which is 95%, is planning to purchase in some way, shape, or form. They have often more people to buy for. They have more things that they have to consider in the course of what they're going to buy and how they're going to celebrate the holidays. Number 7 is one of the dampers on Q4, and this may affect your promotional strategy. It could affect what you decide to showcase and feature in your marketing, in emails, in any type of messaging on your site or on any partner sites. And this has to do with the supply chain dramas, which you may have read about, but are increasingly pronounced. They're pretty dramatic and they are ubiquitous, and they're affecting almost every part of the supply chain. We have issues with factories not having enough workers because they're not vaccinated, which is part of the reason that the Biden administration is actually looking to try to get factory workers in regions like Vietnam vaccinated. You have issues with actually the container shipping industry, where there are more container ships just kind of docked off of the coast of Long Beach than have been in probably decades, which means that they are just sitting there waiting to get unloaded. You have port worker issues. You have the same issues with trucking shortages. Every single part of the supply chain is challenged, which means that if you are fortunate enough to have most of your merchandise already in your warehouses, which some companies do, that can actually be to your advantage. If you have certain products already in the warehouse, those are probably the things that you may need to lean on. And the other good piece of news is that, at least for the last mile part of the equation, there's been so much investment and so many companies being, kind of investing and playing and getting products to consumers, that should be a good thing as well. Number 8 is about corporate social responsibility messaging. And it is a huge, huge opportunity. But I will give the caveat that it is an opportunity for those that have already had some equity and some influence in those categories. And that can be everything from environmental and sustainability related products. It could be diversity, equity, and inclusion, values that a company embraces. It could be about being able to support a local community. There are a lot of things that CSR encompasses, and it is something that is really valuable, as you can see here, to a significant percent of consumers. What I thought was really interesting was we gave people a list of a bunch of things and said, what could influence your behavior? And number 1 on the list was that CSR messaging. So if you already have a brand or a series of products that really espouse that very special values, to lean into that messaging in your marketing is something that likely will resonate, and at least according to consumers, is something that they'll respond to positively. Number 9, a little bit of a sister point to that previous point is what you can do to make sure that you avoid churn, that you are retaining shoppers that you've worked really, really hard to get. And the number 1 and number 2 things are really about service and product quality. And then third on the list is, interestingly, the consumer value, the company values, and making sure that they align with consumers. But when we ask shoppers what is most likely to get you to turn away from a brand that you've engaged with, it is that the customer service isn't at the level that a shopper expects, or that the products aren't at the quality that the shopper expects. Now, these are not things that you can just turn on overnight. You can't just double your customer service staff and think that that is going to suffice. These are absolutely long games. But again, if these are things that you have had in place for a while, lean into that from a messaging standpoint. And if it is something that is an opportunity, be investing in it now. You may or may not see the payoff in Q4, but these are things that will likely pay off in the months and years to come. Number 10 is about omni-channel messaging, and it is still incredibly important. One of the things that we encourage, especially given how challenging it will be to deliver products on time, to get products to consumers as they expect them. Every year during the holidays, things get later and later, and especially in a year with tough supply chain issues, it will be an even more pronounced issue. So the more that you promote your sales and your offers in different formats, you promote them online, you promote them offline, you promote them on your website and all of your different properties, that is incredibly important. And that's really what this data here shows. That top data point is really how much consumers are seeking out the information. They're pulling information. It's not just even about what's being pushed to them. They're seeking out information in the different places where they're expecting things to be online, and that's specifically with respect to offers and promotions. Number 11 is about how consumers are researching different things that they purchased. So what you see here on this slide in the top in the green are different categories that people purchased. And they range, as you can see, from everyday commodities like groceries to really high ticket durable goods like appliances or furniture. And then we also asked those consumers who made a purchase, a recent purchase in each of those categories, what were the media formats? How did they discover a particular product? How did they research that product? And what I thought was really, really fascinating here is, even though no number has kind of a 70% plus metric, how diversified shoppers are in how they are researching. So there's really no one size fits all tactic for every category. And particularly for higher consideration categories like baby products, where people may be really, really cautious about what they purchase, or if it's an expensive purchase like an appliance, or if it's a piece of furniture, people people are going to be looking at everything from expert reviews to content sites to coupon sites to kind of to shopping apps and a whole slew of other touch points in between before they complete their transactions. And again, I just want to point out that the more that you are where that shopper may be looking, the higher the likelihood is that they will discover you if they aren't already your shoppers. And even if they are, that they'll get the trigger again to come and revisit you and to consider you again in the course of that transaction. Number 12 is about the importance of price and offers and how much they matter to new shoppers, but also how much you want to reinforce your messaging to your existing customer base as well. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, which is the data on the left, is that so many shoppers are actually repeat shoppers across a variety of different categories. And certainly the commoditized categories like grocery are the ones where you're going to have the greatest number of repeat buyers. But even across the board, you want to think about that retention, but also as you think about acquisition, which we know that so many internet marketers are extremely aggressive about doing, the way that companies manage to get those shoppers on board is often by having some compelling price offer, and often by having unique merchandise as well. And 13th is about merchants ensuring that you have all of the site best practices in place. And this is really a point about what are you doing on your website to make sure that you have the best practices in place to drive as much conversion as you can? And I like to use this as almost like your checklist for a given product detail page. So you'll see things like the date of when an item can be expected to arrive as actually being one of the most important things that consumers are looking for when they are about to complete a transaction. And this is actually something that started to surface in our surveys a couple of years ago, is just that people wanted to know, when they could get something, often because e-commerce leaders like Amazon expose that pretty early in the shopping experience. But for other merchants, you often have to go deeper into the shopping experience, often to the checkout, before you know the answer to that question. And the more that you can expose that earlier, the better it is for you, because especially if you are able to deliver things in a timely fashion, or in a fashion that the consumer is expecting, that works to your benefit. And then there are other things that are extremely beneficial, like the shipping information and the product detail pages, the ability to filter, which means that you need to have all of the right attributes of the product in place in your content management system so that products actually surface when a consumer filters based on that. So with that, I just want to wrap up again and just talk you through some of the things that are takeaways here. First is just the complexity of the purchase journey across every different type of product category. So you want to be as diversified as is necessary to reach those shoppers where they are. The second point is really about the importance of promotions and coupons and how much they matter. But at the same time, I do want to emphasize that people don't always just want the cheapest thing. They want the confluence of a great product with a great value. And value can often be that it may be a little bit more expensive, but you get something better out of it. You may have a more generous return policy, or there is a longer warranty, or the product is available for pickup locally. So all of those elements can be considered part of what is value. When we look at what I call recovery categories, so through the pandemic, there were some categories that honestly struggled more than others, and I put travel in that space. I put apparel, restaurants in that space, and to the degree that you have the inventory to support promotions during Q4, lean into it. but also be mindful of the fact that particularly in physical goods categories where supply chain is potentially an issue that could hold back some of that promotional capability. And then the other piece is that for first-time purchases, if customer acquisition is really a goal, you want to really think about kind of providing as many of those promotions and offers as you can. And I want to wrap up with one last slide that is very specifically about the holidays. And I positioned it a little bit like a checklist. So let me just kind of walk you through some of the things that I think are that we think will be most valuable as you think through what's important for marketing, for customer service, and fulfillment. So from a marketing standpoint, we saw that there are consumers who are extremely values focused. And that means, I mean corporate social responsibility. And if you can identify who they are based on things they may have clicked on in the past or things that they're searching for, you want to market and message to them a little bit differently. So you're leading with some of those values that could be important to you. The second is you want to cast the net wide in reaching these shoppers. So remember what I said about just the diversity of touch points in connecting with consumers. We talked about messaging, socially responsible themes wherever possible. And then I want you to think about being early, as every year we know that items always arrive late, particularly during Q4. Especially in the month of December, but also this year when there are issues related to supply chain, which could mean that items don't even arrive until November, December. But if you can pull purchasing forward, if you can take advantage of the fact that the merchandise in the warehouse could be exactly what shoppers want, to really lean into that wherever possible. I also encourage you to use experts and voices of authority to your advantage, particularly for larger ticket items, high ticket items, high consideration purchases. Those could be appliances, furniture, baby products, and recognize that authoritative content sources are things that those shoppers are often looking for, not just simply, what's the cheapest price. From a customer service standpoint, we encourage site confidence messages, and that is particularly useful for things like, can you make commitments around when packages are going to arrive, or can you make commitments around the availability of items? That's something that can be really, really frustrating to shoppers, is that you may message, oh, this product is available for sale, and then like 12 hours later, they get a cancellation message because, the inventory management system wasn't updated and the product actually wasn't available for sale. So the second point is about chat and leveraging live chat. That is still something that is not ubiquitous in all of retail. The third point within customer service is to have ample post-purchase notifications, especially if you have delayed a package getting to a shopper. From a fulfillment standpoint, my 2 points are to, if you have stores, to lean into that store-based delivery. And then we talked about early shopping, but also to pad your delivery time somewhat. It is always better, especially during Q4, to under-promise and over-deliver, and I worry that some merchants have departed from that in their zealousness to try to just kind of have a really compelling shipping message. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to the ZMG team.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for all of these insights. It's always a pleasure to see you and to get your take on kind of where the industry is heading.
Thank you. It's great to be here.